Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. Just a little bit more about me. Really just with being parents, I'm a parent too. I have an 8-year-old in 3rd grade. I did grow up here in the suburbs, and like she said, I have been at Linden for a long time, and so we have adult anxiety services and adolescent and child, so we work with people from 8 to then when the lifespan. And so I was a clinical therapist in the adolescent anxiety program for about 7 years. Before then I became the manager. So I've been working with anxiety for a really long time. And so hopefully I can give you guys some strategies today that could be helpful for you. And so we're going to talk about anxiety a little bit first. We're going to talk about an action plan to help manage anxiety, as well as then talk about life and crisis skills to practice with your child. So, anxiety is an anticipation of a future threat. Anxiety is helpful. So, one thing that I would love for people to take away from today's presentation is that we need anxiety. We don't want to get rid of anxiety. It's very important. It helps keeps us safe. It motivates us. And so we do want to see the difference between kind of that typical anxiety that's helpful and motivating to then when it shifts to an anxiety disorder. So when people come into the program, a goal typically is never like, I want to get rid of my anxiety disorder. The goal is, I want to get rid of my anxiety a lot of the times. So kind of like step one is talking to people about anxiety versus the disorder part. So how do we know that? So we know when it interferes with our daily activities, right? So the things that we used to, be able to do on a regular basis now, they're starting to get interrupted, whether it's a lack of concentration or a low motivation to do the activity. It lasts beyond the circumstances, so perhaps there is going to be an anxiety-provoking event, and then that anxiety occurs, but then even 3 days after, that anxiety lingers. As well as then it occurs in more everyday situations where there's no actual factual threat that exists. So a lot of times anxiety, right, is paired with that fight or flight and freeze scenario. But there's a lot of research that shows, especially for kids and teenagers, is that like social isolation or being kind of kicked out of that social group is just as threatening as sort of an actual life or death situation. And so that social piece is included in this world usually, especially when we're talking about kids and teenagers. So there's a lot of common anxiety symptoms, and so I think this leads to sometimes people feeling like they're the only ones that feel this way, this anxiety. Because you could line up 10 people and they all experience anxiety different, so then kids in particular can kind of be like, you don't understand, no one does. No one experiences what I experience, and it's because anxiety symptoms can affect you from head to toe. An interesting part from a psychology standpoint, but also I think important information for people to have, including us adults, is that every single one of these have a purpose. We just often don't know what it is. So when it comes to that fight or flight mode, that the anxiety perks up, because it's like there's a potential threat. Something's happening, either a life or death, or I'm going to get embarrassed, which again brings back to that social piece. It perks up to then try to find that threat, and then possibly get ready to fight, flight, or freeze. And so with that, all of this is included in that. So for example, I'm trying to think. I think like a dry mouth or like a lump in your throat, difficult to swallow, is a big one that I hear in the anxiety program. And so the reason for that is because when we get into that fight or flight mode, that survival mode, we do not have to create saliva in order to survive. So then when we get in that fight or flight, all of our resources want to go to our arms and our legs so that we can run away or we can fight whatever the threat is. So then the resources get shifted. So then something like saliva, which isn't necessary, we stop producing it or it really slows down. So then it can cause us to have that really dry mouth. With blurry vision, that happens a lot too. That's, I think, very scary for people. And it's kind of the same idea with the threat, is that again, that anxiety perks up. So now the anxiety is looking, what's the threat, what's the threat? So your eyes are dilating to look for that threat, right? So if we were driving a car in the snow and ice, we want that, right? We want to be able to see everything in front of us so that we can see what the threat is. Well, when it's a test or it's a potential social embarrassment or something in that arena, there's nothing for the eyes to focus on, so they're kind of going in and out, which causes us to have blurry vision. Does that make sense? Pretty fascinating, right? And so a lot of the times, this in itself in our programs is like aha moments for our patients, even our adult patients, because I think we can appreciate it more, understand where it's coming from. The more information we have, the more information we can gather, typically helps our anxiety. Another big one is stomach aches. We get that a lot. And so stomach aches happen, same kind of idea with the saliva producing, is that we don't need to digest food if we need to run away from like an attacker. And so then with that, our body will stop digesting. So then because it's such a quick shift and all of those resources from our stomach go to our arms and our legs, then we can get stomach aches because of it. So sources, again, same idea with the symptoms. It's such a vast spectrum that it can often feel like we're alone. So everywhere from new situations to transitions, worrying about the judgments from other people, to academic concerns, concerns about the future and health, separation from loved ones, any kind of like trauma symptoms. Anxiety typically is partnered with PTSD, having a panic attack, any kind of performance, so this could be speeches or sports, specific fears. We've seen an uptick the last couple of years in the program of specific fear of vomiting. I don't know if you've ever experienced that or your kids have, but we've seen a little bit more of it these last couple of years, and then bullying as well. So lots of sources of anxiety. And if you look at these, like again, looking back at that fight or flight, right, a lot of these make sense, right? Like when I was in 5th grade, I had pretty severe separation anxiety from my mom after she was in a car accident. I thought my mom was going to die. And so now my little 5th grade self woke up and was like, oh, my mom could still die. And that was really scary, fight or flight. And so a lot of these things, a lot of times when people are having a panic attack, they feel like they're going to die. So then these are all very connected. So then signs of anxiety, things that you might see. So big one is those physical sensations, because again, the more the fight or flight's getting activated and then things start to become chronic, we can then start to have kind of chronic medical issues as well, chronic stomach aches, acid reflux, kind of things like that. When it comes to school, you might see frequent trips to the guidance office, to the social worker, to the nurse, sometimes paired with those physical sensations. A loss of interest, so quitting things that they've always really found interesting, or asking not to go to practice maybe, to a sport or an activity, struggling with concentration, focus, retrieving information. It's very hard for us, our memory is affected when we're anxious, especially if we have chronic anxiety. You might see constant fidgeting or hard to sit still. There's like a restlessness that can happen. Acting out or irritability can come. And sometimes I think there can be this myth that like it's a kid like being bad. But what I think happens a lot of times when someone's anxious is that they're anxious and their mind is saying either like run away, fight, flight, freeze, whatever it might be. And then that intense emotion maybe comes out by shouting and maybe like making one step towards a teacher, a parent. And then that person, that adult, backs off. So then the anxiety part of the brain learns, okay, the next time I feel cornered, let's try that again. Because it worked. It got the person to back off. So shouting or maybe knocking something over gets people to back off when I'm feeling very emotional. And so this irritability, this acting out, can kind of be secondary because it was an accidental learned behavior. I think the same thing can happen with being like quiet or selectively mute. That can happen as anxiety. Same kinds of things, especially teachers, they don't have a lot of time. So if they're asking a question to a student, the student's not answering, they maybe try a couple ways to get them to talk, and then they don't, they just have to move on. And then the kid learns, if I just stay quiet long enough, like, they'll just move on. And then the same thing sometimes can happen with parents too. Especially if you're trying to get your kid to school, you're trying to get to work, and then so those kind of things can happen as well. So that's kind of the background about anxiety. So just learning a skills action plan. So it takes our patients about 5 weeks to get through our program. And so that's, we have a partial hospitalization, which is 6 hours a day, and then an intensive outpatient, which is 3 hours a day. So 5 weeks at 6 to 3 hours, and I'm only talking to you guys for like 40 minutes. So you're getting this tiny little clip. So I just always like to point that out, as well as all of these skills. So we're going to talk about dialectical behavioral therapy and acceptance commitment therapy skills. And it's a lot about regulating the emotions, so doing what we can to try to keep just that anxiety low as much as we can, and then practicing skills when the anxiety does get in a higher range. Everything that we're going to talk about is what we would also teach our adults. It's what I, as a psychologist who considers themselves to be a DBT and ACT person, not even a therapist, just a person, this is the skills I practice for myself with my 8-year-old. I'm teaching this to my 8-year-old. That's why I love these skills so much, because I don't believe you need to have, here's the skills for like my 10-year-old, here's my skills for my 15-year-old, here's skills for me, maybe here's skills for my partner. We can use them all. They're all interchangeable, and we can practice at the same time. Because how many, if your child is anxious, does that make you anxious? And if you're anxious, can that make your child anxious? So we need to practice these skills just as much as our child does. So this is what we're going to talk about. So we need to set our day up for success. So I'm guessing none of this is necessarily going to be new, but I can't talk about managing anxiety without talking about these things because they're just so closely related. So we need to take care of our body, we need to sleep well, eat well, get active. This is probably the #1 way that for us to manage our anxiety, are these type of things. And as adults, as parents, do you guys think that you're like A+ when it comes to sleep? Eating, getting exercise? So this is why we need to practice it just as much, and the kids too. Know your values, so know what's important to you, as well as then for your kid. So we need to identify what are our family values, what's the way that we want to behave. So values are things you cannot check off the list, right? So if you want to be an honest person, then you tell the truth, right? Honesty isn't something you necessarily check off the list. If you value honesty, you'll value honesty typically forever. And so what kind of parent do you want to be? What kind of student, maybe for your child, what kind of son or daughter does your child want to be? Student, things like that. So let's say your child, a value is like commitment and loyalty and responsibility are big ones for them, and they're a part of a team. So then if they're feeling anxious and skipping practice, are they moving towards that values? No, right? And from a DBT and ACT perspective, that's actually going to increase your anxiety even more. And then most likely kind of cause self-esteem issues, because now we're not acting in accordance to our values. And so, and the same for us, right? If I consider myself to be a kind, patient, compassionate parent, but then I shout at my son because I've asked him to brush his teeth for the 7th time, right? But that's not how I view myself as a parent. So then that's going to affect my anxiety, and that's going to then keep it raised throughout the day perhaps. So then accumulating positive experiences throughout the day is another way to sort of help keep our anxiety in check and kind of in a lower range all the time. And they seem really simple, and sometimes at Linden, I'll get little like Snickers of like, really? Like these are gonna be really helpful, but they matter. And that's why it's even, Marsha Linehan created DBT, like accumulate positive experiences. So I'm not saying wearing fun socks is all of a sudden gonna make your anxiety out of one for the whole rest of the day, right? But it's accumulating, it's all day long. This is just how we want to do our best to kind of create this positive reinforcement culture where we're doing sort of these fun things often, creating positive experiences. As well as you can see, it's not accumulating positive emotions. So we can't always do that. But if we're going to maybe have a stressful day, you know, by the time we go to bed at 10 o'clock, you know, I'd rather have 15 accumulated positive experiences on top of that than not having it, right? Like either way, if I'm gonna go to bed stressed or anxious about something, I'd rather include a bunch of positive experiences on top of that. So then the whole day isn't about anxiety. When we see our kids get to school refusal, I'm pushing the button. When we see our kids get to school refusal, one of the things we find is that all conversations are about school. It's school in the morning, trying to get the kid to school. Then it's in the afternoon, you're gonna go to school tomorrow, right? And then it's over dinner, like what do we need to do to get you to school? Which is understandable because we're trying to problem solve, but then everything comes about the anxiety-provoking thing. And the more that we can engage in other experiences, the better. And then hobbies and interests, as well as then building a sense of accomplishment is really important too from a self-esteem standpoint. And especially as adults, we have a tendency as adults, as busy parents, to put hobbies and interests aside, and we kind of can go through life that's a little like repetitive sometimes. And Marsha, again, who created DBT and is a huge researcher, that sense of accomplishment is one of the #1 ways to help with our own like self-esteem. And then it's awesome role modeling, right? To show our kids that hobbies and interests are important. And we want to be able to do things that moves us towards our values and this life that we're looking for, because that's what we're telling our kids all the time, right? Is like, we want you to be able to live this full and meaningful life. And the best way to do that is by role modeling it and showing it. So we're not just using words, that we're doing it with our actions as well. And then it's very important to recover throughout the day. That's just as critical too. So that way, on a scale of like, let's say 1 to 10, 10 being the highest anxiety, that if we get to like a 6, we do something to recover that can maybe bring us down to a 4. So that way it's not just going up and up and up. And we see this sometimes if kids have like a test, like 8th period, it's like you can watch their anxiety just go up as the school day goes on. And if we can do these things, then perhaps by the time we get to 8th period, our anxiety is at like a 4 instead of an 8. And so the reason all these are important is because of the more we do this, all of this as a big picture, the more regulated we are. And so then when we're dysregulated, so when we're not doing these things, so when either we as parents or our children, you know, are not eating well, sleeping well, they're playing on their phone until 1 o'clock in the morning and only getting like 5 hours of sleep, and they're eating a donut and an energy drink for breakfast, and they haven't exercised or got outside time, we're gonna be dysregulated, which then means that on an emotional intensity, so that being like a 10, and then over time, we're gonna climb our ladder really fast. So it would be like if we didn't do any of those things, we're walking out the door at like a 4. We haven't even done anything yet. We haven't even interacted with our coworkers. We haven't even acted with our kids yet, or the kids haven't even interacted with our teachers yet, but we're walking out the door at like a 4 or a 5 simply because we're dysregulated. Nothing anxiety-provoking even happened yet. And so then we stay up there a really long time. It's hard for us to recover the more dysregulated we are. And then it takes us a really long time to come down from that. So it's this like very long process. The more regulated we are, then we climb up that that ladder, that intensity slower. And so it's not this jump that goes up, it's like slower throughout the day. If we have something anxiety provoking, like stressful in the afternoon, or even let's say like your child, their friend is upset with them and not talking, right? Like you just have to sit with that all day long. But again, we're still gonna experience anxiety because that's a basic human emotion. So we might still experience intense anxiety, maybe right before a speech, but we'll be up there a short amount of time. And then we'll be able to come down very quickly. So a lot of the times people just want right there, when they're coming to me as a psychologist that has worked a lot with anxiety, what the goal is, how do I keep my anxiety, basically like below a 3 all the time. And if we are going to live full and meaningful lives, that's not going to be able to happen because anxiety shows up because things are important to us. And so then we want the emotion regulation like green side. This is sort of the culture, which might be a mind shift for us of what we're looking for. Does that make sense? Okay. So now some skills. I have way more skills on the slide that I'll be able to teach. But I hope I pick ones that you'll still be able to see by just the name of them. And so Marcia who created DBT, so she has this STOP, this acronym STOP to help us because when we're anxious, like I was saying before, it's hard to concentrate. And so then it's helpful to have something to reference, to come back to, that's a little step-by-step. And like I said, I use this for myself, I use this for my own child, I use this for all the patients at Linden Oaks, even if they're an adult. And so, stop the urge to act impulsively, take a step back, observe, and proceed mindfully. So, stop the urge to act. This is when that fight, flight, or freeze is getting activated. And so the first thing we just want to do is stop. And because it's very difficult for us, to start to rationally think if that anxiety gets too high too fast. And so what happens is the anxiety, of course, is just like, my goal is to keep Laura safe, so let's fight, or let's run away, or let's freeze. But I have to decide, as like a whole person, if that's what's actually necessary. So the first thing is stop. And again, as parents, it can be tough when something's happening and your fight or flight is almost getting activated for your child. Right? So we want to do the same thing so that we don't impulsively shout or say something that we've all said things we regret, right? As parents or even as partners, and then this can help us to have that not happen. So then take a step back. So with this, it's very hard to think of skills on the spot, so we need to get unstuck kind of from what's going on so that we can be more regulated. And the best way to do that is some sort of grounding exercise. And the most popular these days are probably like breathing exercises. 4-square breathing has been the kids' favorite at Linden for the 14 years I've been there, which is why that's the one I brought to you guys. I think it's a quick and good one to help us, so then we role model it. And so anytime I have ever done this with a kid, I'm doing it too. I'm not saying necessarily to the kid or my own child, like how about you practice 4-square breathing and like almost like I'll watch you do it. Let's do it together. Don't ever ask, they're always gonna say no, right? You all just like, let's practice 4-square breathing together. Ready? Let's go. In, 2, 3, 4, hold it, and then out 4, and then hold it for 4. And so we want to do it together, which is going to keep our anxiety down as parents, as well as then hopefully keep your kids down as well. And the nice thing about it is that it works both ways. So if you and your kid, some hyperventilate, which then is making you breathe too heavy, and so 4-square breathing can help keep that in control. But sometimes when people are anxious, they hold their breath. This helps with that as well. And then, if you need to take it up even a notch to be more concrete, you could literally draw a square or even just a piece of paper. And then if you need something even more concrete, like you breathe in, hold, out, hold, to even give something concrete to do with the hands. And you don't need anything special for it. So observe. So Now that we've stopped, we've grounded ourselves, which is hopefully keeping our anxiety lower, now it's time to figure out what's going on, and we want to be a curious scientist. So like, again, for us as parents, what's happening for me right now? Why am I getting like maybe triggered for this? What are my thoughts? What are my urges? I'm noticing an urge to start to shout. Or who's involved? What's going on? And these are the things that can help if you're talking to your kid about something that all of a sudden they seem like panicked or upset about something. You know, we can kind of talk about this, and there's lots of ways to do it. You know, depending upon how you want to. We use a scale of 1 to 10 at Linden, but kind of this picture up here, you could use like a green, yellow, red. Blue usually means like sad, or like a body of someone. If you have a younger kid, like a body image, and they can point to where it bothers them the most. Or they could color, you know, like we'll have kids that like color like a butterfly like in the belly to show that it's, you know, butterflies and things like that. But we can only make effective choices if we know what's going on. And so if we don't know what's going on, it's going to be very difficult for us to be able to make a rational decision, which is then why our default's the emotional decision and that fight or flight. And so being able to know what's going on is really helpful, and this is something that's going to take time. This is something that, it's not just like, oh, I'm going to ask these questions and all of a sudden my kid will have the answer. Just like if you do this with yourself, you know, do a few check-ins throughout the day. You don't even have to wait for something to happen. You know, these are life skills. We can practice these all day long. And we can kind of check in. I think one of the things that I notice for myself is when I'm at Linden, sometimes I just have super busy days. And I'm going, and then I get home and I continue that. Have you ever done that? Like that rushing, and I don't need to do that anymore. But I think it's because things were moving so quickly and I didn't really check in and observe. So now I try to use my drive home as this like quick check-in, where am I at? Because if something happens and my anxiety or my emotions are more at like a 6, when I get home, you know, if my like son didn't do his homework that he was supposed to, most likely I'm going to get annoyed with that. So then if I can take my drive home to get me from a 6 to a 4, I'm going to be way better off. Even like with my partner too. So then proceed mindfully. So back to those values. So it's not, the question I often get from people, even from friends and family, is always about the anxiety. The question I come back with is, what would your values say? We don't want to make our decisions in service of our anxiety. We want to make our decisions in service of my values. What do you want your life to look like? What would make it full and meaningful? Then that's the answer. We have to go do that. And then we want to practice skills along the way to try to get at any barrier that as we're sort of moving towards this path, as anxiety shows up, what we can do then to manage that. Because otherwise, if we focus on the anxiety, then we're going to, it's like we're living life, oh, we hit an anxiety, we got to figure out how to avoid it, so I need to go over here. Okay, now let's get back on, and then, oh, that anxiety again. And then, like, it's your path starts to become very, like, squiggly and windy versus let's move forward, here's a barrier, let's figure it, problem solve, figure out, practice the skill to survive that emotional experience and then keep going. And then we want to have the skills kit. We want to have a skills kit, a skills list, something handy so that we can reference it very quickly so we don't have to be like, what were all those skills Laura talked about? You can just pull it out. And sometimes we get so detailed that we actually even just put them in order. Sometimes you just have a list and it's like, pick one. Or it's like, this is what we do first, 4 square breathing. This is what we do second, this is what we do third. Just to even make it more concrete. I think that can be helpful for younger kids to make it more concrete. So then what are some of these skills? So these are some, what I would consider to be, well, and DBT and ACT, life skills for low to moderate anxiety. So these are, or stress really. These are things that I think everyone on the planet can practice all the time. I don't think you have to have an anxiety disorder. I don't think you have to have depression. I think these are activities that can just help keep your emotions, help keep you lower, help keep you regulated, and be able just to live life more fully too, I think. And so some skills are like willing hands And that's just that idea that we have a tendency to like fists when we get anxious or emotional. And it's like an action with our body to show that I'm gonna like accept this, allow this sort of emotion that I don't really like, but I'm gonna allow it in. And it's a skill that you can use that no one would even know you're practicing, right? Because like right now, like I could be, like my hands open right now could be then me practicing it. But our mind and our body's connected. And so if our mind is like, I don't know, something bad's happening, and then our body tenses up because it's getting ready to fight or flight, if we open up our bodies, then that's going to send signals to our brain that we are physically safe. Imagine bubbles taking away any kind of unwanted thoughts. So if we're thinking about something again and again, maybe it's a test tomorrow, maybe it's a bully at school, maybe it's a fight with a friend, we can imagine if we could kind of pluck those thoughts out, put them in a bubble, and then let the bubble kind of float them off. And if you have, the teenagers have fun with this too, but we actually have like real bubbles that just to use as we're practicing this. Take 10 belly breaths. So when you're doing belly breathing, as you breathe in, you want your belly to go out. And then as you breathe out, you want your belly to go in. Breathing from the belly is very important. If we breathe from the chest, chances are we'll get a little quicker, and then we're going to hyperventilate. And so we want to breathe from the diaphragm as well, so from the belly, as well as belly breathing kicks in the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the calming one. Breathing from the chest, that can kick up the sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight or flight. So that's why belly breathing is so important. Imagine family and friends. And so when I had separation anxiety, one of the things that my therapist did was I sat more towards the front of the classroom and I pretended like my mom was in the back of the class, and that just helped me feel better. Notice 5 things in the room you never had. This is really helpful for if you or your child's a thinker and we need to try to distract the mind. And so you can have them like look around their classroom or look around the house and what are 5 things you never noticed before, and kind of name that out. And what that does is it takes up brain power, so there's less than for the anxiety to think about all the things it's worried about. It makes more room. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is a favorite, and so is dropping anchor. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is looking around the room and 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. You can do whatever word you want, really. But the kids at Linden, this is always their favorite. They love this one. I think the reason I like it is because I think it's a combo for the mind and the body. Because your 5 senses is going to help ground you. Your 5 senses are present. A lot of the times when we're anxious, we're having future thinking, worrying about something in the future. But your 5 senses, what you see here, is happening right now. So then it's going to pull you away from the future into the present. And then the 5 senses is typically soothing to our body. And then looking around for those 5 things, hearing the 4 things occupies the mind, which is then why I like it so much, is because I feel like it's 3 skills in one. Dropping anchor, this is what I do as a manager at Linden. Now that I don't have my own patients, I don't know them as well. I don't know their favorite skills. When they're my own patients, I knew all of that. Now I don't. And so this is an acronym ACE, and this is a grounding, again, just to help you get present and engaged. So you want to acknowledge your thoughts and feelings. And this is something that can take like a millisecond. I'm feeling really annoyed because my son won't brush his teeth. And connect your body slowly. So again, back to that mind-body connection, pushing your feet into the floor maybe, stretching your shoulders back and sitting up, pressing your fingertips together, any sort of thing to connect with the body to help ground your body. And then engage in what you're doing. So back to that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, or notice 5 things. The idea with dropping anchor is that when you're thinking of like an actual real boat, like in a storm in the ocean, is that with a boat out in the storm, if they drop anchor, it does nothing to the storm, right? What it's doing is it's dropping anchor to help steady the boat itself. And that's what all of these skills do. Dropping anchor, all of these skills help steady our mind and our body so that the emotional storm, we can survive it, that emotional experience. Because again, remember, like everyone always comes in and wants me to like fix their anxiety, but what we teach them instead is to appreciate their anxiety, notice when it gets kind of out of control, and then learn skills to help anchor their body during it so that we can move past it. So we'll have kids, sometimes we transition kids back to school that are refusing, and we'll have kids come back that'll say, it's terrible, it's awful, I hated it. And we'll be like, what happened? And then they'll tell us, the anxiety things that happened. And so we'll be like, oh, when did you, and of course they're with us 6 hours a day, they know our humor, and we'll be like, so when did you end up leaving school early and going home? And they'll be like, I didn't. I stayed there the entire day. And then we're like, because we're like, that's to us success, right? So that's a minute for us to pause though, because we had different goals, right? The kid wanted to go to school and have their anxiety be like lower than a 5. I wanted the kid to go to school and stay there the entire day. So we need to check in about that, which I think as parents we have to do with our kids too. Like we had different goals on what was happening because we just want you to live a full and meaningful life and then deal with the anxiety that shows up. And so then a kid that went to school the entire day, we're going to do the happy dance. And then we're, of course, going to talk about adjustments to the skills, because I don't want them to be at a 9 all day, right? But this is still a huge, cause for celebration, and that we want to reinforce that. So then crisis skills. So these are the things that we're going to save a little bit more for if we're in that anxiety range for maybe 8, 9, 10, that higher range. For your own child, I would try to create a ladder of a scale of 1 to 10 and all those symptoms and behaviors of sort of what happens for them at a 4 or a 5 versus a 7 and an 8, things like that. So then that way you're sort of knowing when their crisis is, because if they practice all of these things when they're at a 3, that's going to lower their tolerance level. So our society right now is really big into fidgets. And I worry that then we're teaching ourselves, I always have to have something in my hand, I always have to do something in order to be able to get through this experience. And if we want to have a high tolerance for discomfort, we want to save those type of things for when we're higher on our ladder, because if one will lower our tolerance, but they're not going to help when they're at an 8. So some quick ones, because again there's 100, but some of the favorites is changing your body chemistry quickly. There's a lot of research that shows that doing things that we can change our body chemistry quickly, again, activates that parasympathetic nervous system. So taking a cold shower or an ice pack. So typically taking a warm bath is going to then just keep more self-soothing, but this is more shocking the senses. So it's difficult to always just go take a cold shower, right? So the ice pack is helpful. Intense exercise, so this isn't going for a walk. Going for a walk is good, that's fine. But if we really want to change the body chemistry quickly, I'm talking about jumping jacks. I'm talking about the ones that hurt. Progressive muscle relaxation, which we're going to talk about next. And then distracting the mind. So remember I was saying before, I think things of mind and body a lot. Because I could fidget with something all day long and my mind's still going to worry. So then distracting the mind, word searches, extreme dot-to-dot, Sudoku, things that occupy your mind. I would encourage pulling pages. They make these huge books these days, which is awesome. But then to have your kid kind of pull that out everywhere is a lot. So doing something like word searches is going to occupy the mind, so there's not much left to then look at all that anxiety. Count backwards by 3, or the ABC game, one of my favorites. So progressive muscle relaxation, this is a full body exercise, which is fun and helpful for anxiety. So the goal is to release tension in your body and to help you then recognize too when it is. Have you guys ever gone through the day where you realize your shoulders have been up and then you're because you didn't even realize how tense you were until maybe something happened and then you realized it. So then when you're doing a progressive muscle relaxation, you start typically at your toes and you sort of tense it. So in your shoes, you kind of scrunch your toes on the in-breath. and hold it for a second, and then on the out breath, let go. So like if you were doing your hands, it would be like in, and then you know, things like that. There's a lot of fun ones for little kids. And then, so you like tense on the in breath, hold it, and then tense on the out breath. And then you just keep working. You start at your toes and you work your way all the way up to your head. And then there's just so much research that shows that this, you know, can bring your anxiety down. ABC game, this is when you pick a theme and choose a word that begins with it. So for an example, if it was maybe like animals, it was like alligator, bear, cat. The cool part about the ABC game, your kid can play this by themselves, you can play this by yourself. We as humans can play this by ourselves. We can play it together, right? So I can do A, you do B, I do C, you do D, and we can play off of each other. You can do it with 4 people, A, B, C, D, and just keep moving around. Again, if we need more like concrete, then we could just take a piece of paper and write A to Z, and then like fill it in. And then you can almost make like a worksheet. We do this sometimes at the program when kids are really struggling. I'll write A to Z, and then at the top I'll put like names, like a column of names, and then like a column of animals, a column of food. And then they like sit in our group. And because sometimes the first step I have to do is just have the kid in our group room. And then they'll sit in our group room and like fill that out. And that's obviously helpful for the younger kids. I think it's harder to sometimes stay on track. Here's a few books that I really like. They're all parenting books. So the left one is more going to be like concrete decision-making skills that can be helpful if your child has higher anxiety. And the ones on the right are a little acceptance and commitment therapy, which is a little bit more like of the life skills, of like creating like a culture, a life culture of how to live a full and meaningful life. And that's it.